Navigating between fragments and activities in Android can sometimes be pretty confusing, not to mention the amount of error-prone boilerplate code you have to write. While Kotlin simplifies a lot of things when it comes to fragment transactions and starting activities, there is still a lot of room for improvement. Navigation architecture component libraries will help you solve your complex navigation demands. They let you skip fragment transactions by abstracting it in the form of simple-to-use navigation destinations, for example. You can set up these destinations in a friendly-looking drag-and-drop editor, which is pretty nice, something like storyboards from iOS. Navigation architecture components support easy way of deep linking into a specific place in your app, and they manage the backstack for you, meaning that when you have some kind of a detail activity and that detail activity is preceded by some kind of a recycler view activity, that recycler view activity will be on the user's backstack, meaning that he can press back button to navigate back automatically when you link to that detail activity with a deep link. With these libraries, you can even pass arguments between activities or fragments in a type-safe way by using the library called SafeArgs. Hello, welcome to ResoCoder, and in this video you are going to learn how to use the navigation architecture components libraries. We are going to build a really simple app which does pretty much nothing except for navigating between different destinations. So here it is, we have a home fragment which is present on this home destination. Then we can also navigate through the bottom navbar to the camera destination. From there we can go and see all photos, and from there we can go back to home. And if you take a look, see all photos. Before there was 62 photos, now there is 44. This is a randomly generated number which is passed from the camera destination over to photos destination as a safe argument. So we are going to delve into these. And then also there is a menu button which will take you to settings. We are going to cover a lot in this tutorial, so let's get right into it. You want to create a new Android project, so hit new project. You want to start with an empty activity, hit next, then name it something as you like, and be sure that the language is Kotlin, but navigation components obviously works also with Java, but this is a Kotlin tutorial. And also include navigation controller in the setup like this. Here is a little check mark. Now, you can have an Android Studio 3.2 Canary 14, I believe it is, or higher. So if you have 3.2 beta, you should be good to go. But for me, that version does not work for some reason. So if you have any problems with creating this new project or with seeing the navigation graph, as you will see later, just download Android Studio 3.3 Canary version or any other version which is more up to date. You probably, if you are watching this a year later than it was published, this tutorial, you can have a 3.5 version. That doesn't matter. Just make sure that you have either 3.2 or 3.3 Canary installed, and you should be good to go with navigation. I already have a project created with some mundane fragments and all of that stuff already there, so that you don't have to watch me just create 4 empty, plain, boring fragments along with their UI and all of that stuff. If you want to get the code from this tutorial, you can do so from the link in the video description, which is gonna take you to resocoder.com. So if you want to have a starter code which looks something like this with these all empty, simple, plain fragments, you can go over there to the link and download this code from there. Alright, now let's go to build.gradle for the module, for the project actually. And we are going to add one line of class path over here, which is this one. So get it from the link in the video description because it's quite long. This is the SafeArgs plugin for Gradle. This is really necessary if you want to use SafeArgs. You don't need to use safe arguments with navigation component, but it's really nice to have something type safe when it comes to argument and not just be passing plain bundles all over the place. Now let's go over to build.gradle for the module app. And we already have Android X app compad and constraint layout. And because we ticked that check mark at the beginning of the project, we already have navigation fragment KTX implemented. If you are using Java, you don't want to have this KTX over here, although it's probably going to work just fine. So we have this one plugin already here, but this is not enough. We need to have another plugin. We also want to have navigation UI, so paste that in here. And then I'm gonna be using the material design so-called 2.0, so I will have some material design libraries over here and also support v4 library. This has nothing to do with the actual navigation component, but I just have it here so that you have some eye candy, nice things to look at. So we are going to paste it over here, material Google, and also legacy support v4. Now, the last thing that we need to do over here is to apply plugin for the save arcs. So I'm going to actually type this one out. So we want to have over here that apply plugin, and the plugin is Android X .navigation.save arcs. This will allow you to use the save arguments inside your app. And now after all of this is here pasted, we can press on sync now in the upper right corner. Alright, so now you want to create menu navigation and also menu toolbar. I already have them here, but if you want to create them from scratch, you can do new menu resource file. And if you don't have this menu folder, you can press on res and new Android resource directory and create the directory named menu. Once you have menu navigation, XML and menu toolbar, open them up and make them look something like this. And again, you can get the code from the link in the video description. So menu navigation is basically the menu that will be present on the bottom nav bar, which is right over here. So we have home and camera. And also it will be present when you have the screen rotated. There won't be bottom nav bar, but there will be this side navigation, which can be pulled from the side of the screen. So this is basically the same menu as on the bottom nav bar, except that it's now on the navigation side. So this menu has two items. The first one has ID destination home, and then the second one has ID destination camera. Now, these IDs are really important because these IDs on these menu items need to match the names, the IDs actually of our destinations, which we are going to set up later in this mobile navigation graph XML. So we are gonna add some fragments over here. And these fragments, which will be present over here, will have the same ID as these menu items. That's because we are gonna use the navigation UI library, which handles some of the boilerplate code for us, so we don't have to actually connect the buttons on the bottom nav bar ourselves. We are just gonna pass the bottom navigation bar to the library, and it will parse all of the items of the bottom navigation bar, and it will automatically navigate to their respective destinations. So make sure that these IDs are matching the IDs in mobile navigation, which we are gonna create in a little bit. And the same applies to the menu toolbar, which has only one item, which is for the destination settings. So make sure that they are matching also. Awesome, now let's go over to the layout of our main activity. So we have two layouts, one for the portrait mode and one for landscape. So here is the one for portrait, it has bottom navigation view, and then we have the one for landscape. This one doesn't have the bottom navigation view, but it has the side navigation right over here. Otherwise, they're pretty much the same. Now, we are using the pattern in which the library is only a container for all of the fragments. So activity has only the global kind of a navigation, and this pattern in which the activity is only a holder for all of the fragments, and those fragments are only the navigation destinations, which means that we aren't jumping from one activity to another. We have only one activity and then we are jumping between fragments. So this pattern is recommended by Google, and I think that it really makes sense to do it this way. However, you aren't restricted to doing it this way if you don't want to. You can have multiple activities even when you are using navigation components. Just know that this pattern is something that you should look to and probably adhere to if you don't have some crazy needs. What's really important in these two activity main XMLs is this fragment. This is really mandatory, and this is the fragment which is actually the navigation host. So we don't populate this fragment ourselves, it's going to be populated by the library. So this has ID navhost fragment. The ID is not really that important, but we have the name Android X navigation fragment navhost fragment. This is important, the name should be the same. Also we have app navgraph, which is set to navigation mobile navigation, which is our graph over here, which we are gonna create in just a little while. And also this is the default nav host, because we set the default nav host to be true. So this is going to be populated by the fragments from the graph by default. Okay, so one last thing that I will show you is that all of the fragment layouts and also the classes for fragments are really just empty implementations. So over here, for example, in the fragment home, we have only one text view. In the fragment photos, we have a button, a text view, two text views, so nothing fancy over here. And also in the fragment classes, we have just really simple code which only inflates the layout for us, so we don't have anything in here. But we are gonna change this in this tutorial, because in some of the fragments we are actually gonna write some code. Also, again, get the code from the link in the video description. Alright, awesome! Now finally, let's get to mobile navigation XML. And by the way, if you don't have it over here as I do, you can always go to the res and navigation, and over here it is. So now let's add our fragments to the mobile navigation graph. So we are gonna press this plus symbol, and the first fragment that we want to add here is the fragment home. Then we also want to add destination, or actually fragment camera, but we are gonna rename this to destination camera. Then also fragment photos. And now the last one, which is going to be fragment settings. Now I like to rename these, or not rename, but change their IDs. So over here, when you click on the fragment in the graph, we can change its ID, so the home fragment will be renamed to destination home. All right, now the camera fragment, camera fragment will be renamed to destination camera. Then also photos fragment to destination photos, how else? And lastly, the settings fragment to, obviously, destination settings. Alright, so now we have all of the fragments in our navigation graph, and we could actually leave it as it is now, because we can navigate simply from, for example, destination home by simply navigating to destination camera, or from home to destination settings, and that will work just fine. However, there is a really nice way to simplify the navigation, and that is by using actions. You can add an action by dragging from this right side of this circle, right? You can drag this circle and it's gonna create a line. We wanna connect it with the photos fragment. This creates an action. We are gonna name this action next action. And the nice thing about this action is that we can call only next action from camera, and then it's going to figure out what kind of a destination it should navigate to automatically. So we only know that we want to navigate to next action, and then the library will sort it out for us that we actually want to navigate to destination photos. Now, why would we want to do this? Well, because when we connect photos to the destination home, we can also set this action's ID to be next action. And now we have basically two actions with the same ID. So if we navigate to next action from the camera, we're gonna get to photos. If we navigate to next action from photos, we are gonna get to home. So we can use the same ID in two fragments and they're gonna navigate to totally different destinations. That is pretty cool. Alright, and one last thing that we wanna do over here is to select destination photos and add an argument to it. So we're gonna press this plus on arguments. This argument's name will be simply num of photos. Its type will be integer. And then we also want to set its default value to be 0. Once it's added, it's gonna be present over here. And by the way, you can do all of this also through XML if you are brave enough. So just know that this is really just plain XML that is generated by this nice UI. So XML is over here, UI is on the design tab. Alright, so once we have this done, let's get over to main activity where we are gonna write quite a bit of code. So we first want to get nav controller, so we are gonna get it into and assign it to a variable val nav controller. And it's gonna be equal to navigation. And we want to find nav controller for this activity, so we are gonna write the activity is this. And the ID of the view on which the fragment should be present is r.id. That, remember that the ID of the view is nav host fragment, just like this. And now let's create three functions, one for setting up bottom navigation menu, the other one for setting up side navigation menu, and the last one for setting up our action bar, which in our case is a toolbar. And actually we need to set that we are using support action bar. So set support action bar to be our toolbar from the layout, which you can get from the link in the video description. So now let's create the first function of the three, which is private fun setup bottom nav menu. It's going to get one nav controller of type nav controller. And inside here, we want to get the bottom navigation. So bottom nav as its ID in the layout. And then we want to use a safe access operator because remember, this bottom nav doesn't have to be present in our app. When we are using it in the portrait mode, it's over there. But once we turn it to be in landscape, it's not here, but rather there is a side navigation. So remember that we need to be using the safe access operator because of this behavior. And then we are gonna write let, which basically just passes the bottom navigation view inside this function. And if you want to learn more about functions like let, apply, and run in Kotlin, you can watch my tutorial by clicking on the card in the corner. Now we want to set up with nav controller this bottom nav bar. So we are gonna write navigation UI dot setup with nav controller, and we want to set up it, which is the bottom navigation bar as it's passed inside this function. And we want to set it up with our nav controller, which is passed into this function as a parameter. So we can now copy this function, paste it below, and this one will say setup side navigation menu. So side navigation. It's also going to accept the nav controller, but it's not going to operate on bottom nav, but rather on nav view, which is the side navigation view. And basically, this is all that we need to change over here. So everything else can stay as it is. And finally, we will have one last setup function, which will be private fun. Oh gosh, private fun. All right. Setup action bar. It's also going to accept a nav controller. And this one function will say that we should set up action bar with nav controller, and we're going to tell it to the navigation UI class. So set up action bar with nav controller. And we want to set it up with this activity, right? And then we also pass in the nav controller, so we're gonna pass it in. And what these two functions do is that they take the navigation menus and they connect them to their respective destinations. And remember that the destinations that are present in our graph have an ID destination camera, and also the menu navigation has destination camera as ID. So it's going to find the destinations for their respective IDs. So make sure that these IDs are matching. And I have almost forgotten, we need to put drawer layout as the third argument to set up action bar with nav controller. So the drawer layout's ID in our layout is simply drawer layout. And what this will do is that when we press on the hamburger icon, so for example, let's go to landscape, and when we press on hamburger, or actually not on hamburger, but we go to camera, and now we press on this back arrow, watch how it changes to the hamburger. This arrow is going to be transformed. Alright, now let's call these three methods from our onCreate. So we're gonna say setup bottom nav menu, and pass in the nav controller, then also set up side navigation menu, also with nav controller, and lastly set up action bar and also nav controller. Now let's create one function which has actually nothing to do with navigation, but we need to have it here because we want to create options menu. So override fun on create options menu. And we are going to say that menu inflator dot inflate, and we want to inflate our dot menu toolbar, and we want to inflate it into our menu, which is passed to this function, and then we want to return true. Now let's create another function for when a menu item is pressed on the toolbar. So this function's name is on options item selected. This one will first get the nav controller, so we can actually copy and paste this line from onCreate because we want to get the same nav controller. You could create it so that this nav controller is a class variable, but I'm not gonna do that in this tutorial, so we are gonna simply get it over here again. And now we want to try to navigate to destination matching the menu item ID. The menu item is destination settings, and these IDs are matching with the graph. So over here in the graph, here is also destination settings, this one. So it should work just fine. The function for navigation is returning a boolean. We are gonna store it in val navigated, and it's gonna be equal to navigation UI the on nav destination selected. The nav destination selected accepts an item. We want to pass in the item which was clicked, just like this, and we need to say that it's really not null, so we are gonna use this exclamation marks operator. And then we also want to pass in the nav controller. And lastly, we want to return from this function. If we navigated, we want to return navigated, otherwise, so or, because if navigated is false, it's going to return whatever is to the right of this or logical or operator. So otherwise, we want to return super dot on options item selected. And now finally, one last function is to override fun on support navigate up. And over here, this is basically for navigation like this arrow here, right? This is the up navigation, this arrow. So over here we want to return navigation UI that navigate up, and we want to also pass in the draw layout so that it's going to change to the hamburger icon from the arrow. And also we want to pass in the nav controller, which is gonna again be the same nav controller, so we are gonna get it from navigation find nav controller, and that's it for this main activity. Awesome, now let's go to camera fragment class and we are gonna add some code to there. So we want to first override onViewCreated, and inside here we want to just call super onViewCreated, but also we want to get the button photos, which is the button when we press it, we want to navigate to fragment photos. So we want to set onClick Listener on this button, and when we press it, we want to create val random for the random number generator, so equals new random from Java util, and we also want to instantiate it. And now we want to navigate by using the action, which is this arrow right over here, this one. So this action has an ID next action. So we actually don't need to know that we want to navigate to destination photos, although you could really do that by just calling destination photos instead of the next action. But what we are going to do is that we are going to call next action in order to navigate to our action, not knowing where we are actually navigating. So now let's get the next action from camera fragment directions, which is not present here. So probably what we need to do is to rebuild the project, because this class is automatically generated by the plugin, the Gradle plugin for Safe Arcs. So let's go to build and rebuild project, and that should go away. Alright, and once the project was rebuilt, we can now use the camera fragment directions automatically generated class. This class is present in every single destination, which points to somewhere. So also in the home fragment, it's present over there, but it's called home fragment directions. So now let's go to camera fragment directions. And we want to get the next action, and this function will return our next action. Now on this next action we want to pass a safe argument, so we are gonna say next action dot set num of photos. We cannot use the property syntax for some reason, so we need to use the setter method in here because the code for the library is obviously written in Java for some reason. I don't know why they aren't doing their libraries in Kotlin now, because they can. Kotlin is fully interoperable, but enough of rambling from me. So now let's get to coding again. And this set num of photos will get the random dot next int, and we also bound that integer to be 100 at max. So this is the safe arc. If you take a look in the mobile navigation graph, the destination photos has an argument that we added over here, and also the action has it here, num of photos integer. It's really like you cannot probably see it good on YouTube, but it's over here as argument for this action, because the library knows that this action is pointing to a destination which has this argument. So now let's go back to camera fragment, and finally we are gonna call navigation dot find nav controller for the view on which we are clicking, which is button photos, because the set onClick Listener has a parameter it, which is of type view, which is the button photos on which we are clicking, right? And then we want to say navigate, and we are gonna navigate to next action, which we have over here. But if you don't want to use an action and you want to instead navigate directly to some kind of a destination, let's say destination settings, what you would do over here is, instead of an action, you can pass in an ID. So you would pass in r.id.destination settings, for example, just like this, and it would take you to settings. You don't have to use the actions, but it's really nice to have those actions. In this case, as I've said, we want to navigate to simply next action, and it's gonna take us to Photos fragment. Now, let's go to Photos fragment, and we are gonna retrieve the past save arc over there. So fragment photo, or actually Photos fragment, Kotlin file. And we also want to overwrite on view created. Over here, we also want to set onClick listener, but this time of button home. So set onClick listener. And this time we want to navigate also to next action. But in camera fragment, we were passing a save argument to our action. That's why we needed to get it from camera fragment directions. However, and not use it as a simple ID here. But in Photos fragment, we don't want to be passing anything to the target destination, which is the home destination, because the home doesn't have any save arguments. So what we want to do here is instead, you could also go this way. So you could really retrieve the next action from Photos fragment direction, but you don't need to do that when you aren't passing in any arguments. What you can do instead is call navigation, that find nav controller again of it, and navigate, and you can also navigate to an action as an ID. The ID of our action is r.id.nextAction, so we are all good here when it comes to this set onClick listener. However, we still have one last job to do here, and that is to get the save argument from the Photos fragment arcs generated class. So let's do it right now. We want to get arguments. These are the same arguments which you would get when you are just getting not save arcs, because save arcs are passed to your fragment in a normal argument way. It's nothing really special. It's just that we have helper classes which make it so that we don't need to deal with type unsafe arguments. Those helper classes turn those unsafe arguments into save arguments. So really, save arguments are using the same bundle you all know and dislike. So again, arguments let, just to make it so that we aren't gonna operate on null arguments if for some reason these arguments are not present over here. And we want to get save arcs. And we are gonna get it from Photos fragment arcs. So whenever you are retrieving arguments, you want to get the generated class, the name of the fragment, and then append it arcs. So in this case, Photos fragment arcs. And whenever you are sending some arguments, you want to get the class, the name of the class. So in this case, camera fragment, and then directions. Directions for sending, arcs for retrieving. So Photos fragment arcs, and we want to generate save arguments from bundle, and the bundle is simply it, which is our arguments which are passed to the let function. And then finally we have a text view number inside this Photos fragment, and we want to set its text to be equal to number of photos, and then interpolate. I know that you shouldn't do it this way when you are doing text strings, but this is just a simple tutorial, so forgive me for doing this. Even the lint is saying that I shouldn't be doing this, but whatever. So we want to get num of photos from save arcs. So we are just gonna say save arcs.num of photos, and we are done. So now let's save all that we have done, run it inside an emulator, and here we are. And now I just realized that I didn't rename the destinations, I just changed their IDs. So once I demonstrate that this really works, I will change the names of the destinations so that you won't have this fragment home in the toolbar, but only nice home. So we have home, we have camera, which we navigate to automatically by using the Navigation UI library. Then we also can see all photos. We can go back to home, then again to camera and see all photos. Now there is a different number of photos all done through the Save Arcs. We can press the back button. We can also go to settings. From settings we can go to camera, go back, and now we are back at home. So now the last thing that I will fix here is to go over to Mobile Navigation XML. And when you want to change the names which are present on the toolbar, you can change the label of the destination. So over here you have a label. We have it set to Fragment Home. You want to simply change it to Home or whatever you want to have there. And once you have that set up, it's going to say Home and not Fragment Home on your toolbar. Alright, and that's it for this tutorial. If you wanna get the code, get it from the link in the video description, which is gonna take you to risocoder.com. If you don't want to miss more tutorials like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel and also hit the bell button so that you aren't gonna miss any of my new tutorials. If this video helped you to understand navigation components libraries, give this video a like and also share it. If you have any questions regarding this library or also any other questions or suggestions, or if you just want to say something nice to me or something awful to me, leave it in the comments please. Follow me on social media and see you in the next video.